what I'm going to do briefly when we start is, I need my book, is, so you're in qualitative visual methods. So the key word there is, well, there's a few keywords there, but one of them is qualitative. So this means, not numbers based. Let's just put it that way. So this is other ways of getting data in a qualitative sense, and that's using visual methods. So there'll be lots of ideas about using images, using film, photography, drawing, and so on. So we will have an exercise that we do while we're here listening, and then we'll learn about lots of different methods. You won't become an expert in any of these, but I think it's my objective to give you a snapshot of a bunch of different methods that you might be able to apply in your research. So I think we've got a small enough group to be able to learn something about what you're doing. What I want you to do, your objective today, is to think about how you might apply some of these methods to your project. You may say, once I start, this isn't for me. I'm going to, but try to engage with it and try to say, okay, how could I actually use that method in my project? Would that work? What would it mean? Who would I have to talk to? How would I have to do it? So that would be your objective, because at the end we'll have a little conversation about your individual projects and try to identify ways we might be able to actually use this. And you may say, no, it's not for me. And that's absolutely fine, but then you may say, yeah, this bit, or maybe we can help each other a little bit to identify what we might be able to accomplish. So I think the idea is maybe keep an open mind, and as I said at the beginning, try to think about, okay, I can actually use this method. The beginning is going to be some examples from my work and some students that I've worked with and some of their work over the course of this hour or so. And then there'll be a bit of sort of background, and not theory, but sort of background to visual methods, what they are, and so on, and then some examples of that. So hopefully you get really an overview of what's happening. So this is what we're going to do in this hour and 20 minutes or so. So we're going to look at qualitative visual methods. We're going to talk about what they are, so you have a kind of a good sense of what I mean, at least by qualitative visual methods. And this is kind of, some of these terms are difficult to capture in a single title, and people may disagree with what is what. Then we say why we use them. So I'm going to highlight what I think are some good reasons why you might want to use them in social research, and some things you might want to be aware of as you go forward. And then there'll be a good section of this discussion of how to collect visual data. So we'll talk about, if you're interested in this, where do you find this stuff? What do we do? How do we create visual data rather than textual data, right? Okay. So that's what we're going to do. Before the windows are open, it's been kind of hot and cold in here. So people in the back, if you can manage your climate, you're probably closest to the windows. So feel free to just jump up and manage that. So right, before we start with any of the stuff, everyone should have a pencil of some kind, a piece of paper, right? Right? So what I'd like you to do is get drawing. So I'm going to ask you to engage different parts of your person as in your mind as you listen to me. So you have multiple challenges here today, is to listen to what we're talking about. It's being recorded. The slides will be on the web. You don't have to worry about that. But you're going to engage in a little drawing exercise in the meantime. So what I want you to do is draw this. Okay, as you are, have a look at it, or draw this, whatever you want to draw. There it is. There's something in the middle of the room. So start drawing. Have a go. Draw it in as much detail as you possibly can. Okay, I want you to be incredibly detailed in this. All right, I want you to have perfect representations of this. By the way,
we're going to have lots of things all over. We're making quite big on the page.
One picture for the page.
I'm not going to say any more. This is what you've got. That's your paper. And that's the, don't be too rational about this. Just get to work. Right. Right. So you've started. So if I see pencils stopped, I'll have to interrupt. All right. I don't like to do that. By the way, I should have said this at the beginning. Steve's filming. If you're uncomfortable being filmed, I guess get out of the line of sight, which is absolutely fine. This will be available to you as students as well as the distance learning students, and that's pretty much it, just people on this course. Right, okay, so what are qualitative visual methods? So the first thing I want to say about this is that qualitative methods, this kind of using images and visual methods has been used for quite a long time in disciplines like anthropology or human geography. So we all can imagine, the anthropologist doing the documentary of the tribe or something like this, So visual representations of people and things have been used for a long time. In social research, in the disciplines that are represented here, probably less so, okay? So we have not used visual analysis and visual imagery and visual methods as a technique in social sciences, in the disciplines, urban planning, information management, I assume, and building surveying as a sort of tool of inquiry. And that's where we're going to use it for. We're going to use visual methods as a tool of inquiry. There are a few urban planners in here. I used to be an urban planner, and what I used images in my everyday practice. You see it as a professional. Probably in all of your careers, you use images. You look at images, you interpret images. Planners take images. We take images of streetscapes, of buildings. We're interested in what things look like. It is a common part of our practice. Has anyone ever heard of a visual preference survey? Any of the planners?
Rings a bell, but I must admit that.
There's something that, well, when I was a planner, we used this a lot. We would take 3 or 4 images and put them on a wall, on a PowerPoint, and we'd have participants, the people from the public, would look and say which one they liked the best. So often we would give them like 2 real rubbish suburban things and one beautiful urban thing, and they'd be like, oh, we love the urban, you've done a great, yeah. So we're trying to get people to express their opinions about place by showing them pictures. So these are kind of visual tools. I guess my point is visual tools are part of our everyday practices, yet as a tool of inquiry they have been underused. So drawing on anthropology, human geography, and other sorts of disciplines, creative practice, arts, we're going to bring them in and use them as a tool of inquiry. So the 3 broad approaches I'm going to talk to about this are finding existing material. So going out there and collecting images, just out there. There's an image up there on the wall. I found one, right? So collecting images, generating images. So me as a researcher, maybe taking pictures, taking photographs, producing films. And the third one is participant generated. So these are the 3 areas we'll talk about today. So you are, for example, my participants. You are generating some visual imagery for me. So that's the example of the third. Right. I should say, if everyone could just actually type, even just your first name, just need your name on the top of these. It'd be very useful. You won't be held responsible necessarily for it. So as a way of getting introduced to this, I want to talk about one piece of research where I have used visual methods to talk about a research project. And this might be useful in terms of starting to say, oh, okay, I can start to see how that might be done. So I've worked with in an urban setting on this project called Care for Urban Water Infrastructure. And what we're doing in this project is working with the maintenance teams who go underground and fix or maintain water infrastructure. So this might be culverts and dams, this might be sewers, this might be pipes of drinking water that are going through the city. And we wanted to know what it's like for those people who go in there and maintain those. What's their daily activity like? What do they work with? What do they do? What are these experiences like? So this was a mix of me taking pictures and photography and the researcher and the participants doing it as well. So I've got a few examples here up on the screen. So what we did is we filmed these experiences, right? So I've got photography and UE sort of visual, video cameras. And we gave, you can see the gentleman on the left here, this with the beard, he's got a camera on his head. So we gave them GoPro cameras that they would take underground with them. So we get into these spaces where people don't generally see by giving them the technology, the ability. We just put them on their helmets and they went underground. So this picture up here on the top is is participant generated. It was a camera on his helmet that he was filming underground at the time. So what this enabled me to do is to really see a whole new world of underground work that's happening from the perspective of these workers. And then what we would do is we talk to them about their experiences and so on. So collecting data in that way. And what I found that was useful for using the visual imagery in this particular project was that we found that these workers were connected to the city and to people in the city through a very sort of intimate way, but unseen. So, for example, there was one thing that highlighted, at one point the guys were working in this is underneath a road in Clifton, and they'd built this tunnel using mining techniques to fix a sewer, and most of the water was turned off in that area. But some water did come through while they were filming, and it was warm water. And one of the participants, one of the workers, was like, "Oh, warm water! You know, Lucy's having a bath." You know, so we were able to see they're connected to the people in this very, very intimate way, but people are completely unaware of. So this is a way of sort of shedding light on that. But also, I think what was really interesting is we were able to identify the role of things in a really clear way by going underground and using visual methods, especially with the GoPro picks up the audio as well. We saw sounds, the sounds underneath. There's a device that makes sure the air is not poisoned, and it's beeping. You know, so we hear this constant beeping of this device that's going on. They have special boots when they walk into reservoirs that are for drinking water. They've been emptied, but they want to make sure they're in working order and everything. They have special boots that they wear that only go in those reservoirs. So the role of things in the care for these urban places became very evident, and we can demonstrate that. I can demonstrate that only because I really was able to get in there, into these spaces with them through the visual technique. So this one on the left, this is at a wastewater treatment plant, and this is the stuff that doesn't decompose after it's been through the sewer. So they're still trying to clean all this stuff. Usually it's wet wipes out of the sewers at the very end. Right. I should say also, please do interject if you have any questions whatsoever. If you want to say something, if you have a thought, please do. Interrupt me. I'm happy to answer questions. This has still got this is, I guess, Clifton type of clay or something. This is from underground, so they were, messing around with that. All right, so now at this point, what I'd like you to do is put your pencils down for 1 second. Everyone take the piece of paper and pass it 2 places to your right, please. So we're going clockwise. So this way. Sorry, my right, that way. Sorry, this way. 2 places, so you skip. Sorry. So 2 places. Is that 2 places? Does everyone have one?
Yes, it's the
2, right? All right, keep going. Put your name on it if you can, please. Next, underneath, you don't have to, you could scratch out the other person if you want. Right? Well done. Okay, keep going.
Well, keep drawing.
Keep drawing.
Okay.
Right. So, now, it's up to you. We don't need to debate it. You can figure it out. So, why are we using visual methods? Why are we using visual methods? Okay. So, I've given a little introduction to my project, and I want to talk more sort of generally about why I think this is useful. Okay. So, first thing. Imagery, visual data, is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Any plan, any project that you've looked at. So I got this from a friend's desk. So you might be interested in the regeneration of Bristol's central area. I don't know. And you might say, well, I want to know what they say about, community involvement and things like this. But just as much as these words in here are important, these images are also in this document, right? And social research generally will ignore these images. But there is a treasure trove of image and of data, right? What is this image doing in this document, right? What are they trying to say? How does it support or contrast or engage with what's in the text, right? So we want to start engaging with all of this stuff, the ubiquitousness of data, of visual data in the world. So the world doesn't exist purely of text, neither should social research, neither should research. Research needs to start engaging, or should engage with, beyond just the written word. I think also visual methods are a fantastic way to start thinking about crossing disciplinary boundaries. Now, we're always told to get out of our silos, to get out of silo thinking. So engaging in creative practice, which is what we're doing here, is a way of trying to see the world from a different perspective. If I always use the same method, if I'm a sociologist, I speak to sociologists, I do sociology, I do interviews, I transcribe my data, you know, I'm in the zone, that's what I do. The impact of my research is for sociologists. Where I start to bring in new, doesn't have to be necessarily visual methods, but when I start to bring in different methods, I start to open up who I speak to and who I engage with, who is part of that community. So I can cross those disciplinary boundaries by starting to bring in different approaches. So different methods, creative, visual methods are an important part of helping us do that. All right? So those are a couple of reasons why I think it's sort of generally important. More sort of theoretical sort of possible reasons. Generally, of course, what I would argue is that using what you're doing here is you're doing something beyond words. You're doing something that words can't really express. So images help us express and identify and capture data that doesn't actually exist in a textual way, right? In addition, I think it is important for anyone. Somebody's not drawing. Do your best. So
I can multitask.
so this is an interesting test of sort of our personalities, I suppose.
Wait to see who wins.
There'll be a judging. Yeah, we'll do some. So the other thing is, anyone who wants to work with participants. Using visual methods helps to get at meaning in a way that words often can't. You know, often a picture speaks 1,000 words, right? Have someone draw something for you. Have somebody do something. Is that an artistic thing? Okay, you don't have a question. Right. So keeping track of my time. I tend to speak very fast, and then the timing gets all wacky. But I think we're doing okay. So I think with this argument, the second bullet point is that by doing something visual, we might be able to get some deeper reflections than, say, for example, a survey, a questionnaire, or even an interview might do. By engaging in some of these methods, we get to learn something slightly different, okay? It is different information that's generated, and it's usually, I would describe it as deeper, possibly more emotional, possibly from a different angle that allows the individual, the participant, to be more reflective, to take more time in thinking about how they might answer any particular question. All right? Any questions so far? No?
No, I'm just excited.
Okay.
Carry on.
Right. Okay, so some drawbacks. Yes, I have loads of questions.
Sorry, I was just nodding the wrong time.
Okay, so some drawbacks. Ethically, this can be very, very tricky. If you're going to take pictures of people, it's very hard to keep them anonymous. So a lot of times we say, I won't use your name. Okay, I won't use your name, but here's a picture of you on the cover of my report, right? So you kind of have to go through a different ethical approach when you're using this. You need to be more, you kind of step back from that anonymous sort of perspective and say, look, who you are is actually important, and we're going to actually play on that. There are ways to do it in keeping people anonymous, and I'll talk a bit about that later. But it is tricky, and you have to deal with some ethical issues about when you're using film and you're taking pictures of people in different places, about getting the appropriate sign-offs to make sure that you've done it right. Another thing is anyone behaving differently? Because I'm behaving slightly differently because the camera's behind me. I kind of keep looking back and sort of, I don't know, maybe, so people do tend to behave differently when they're on film and on camera. So you might get some different kinds of responses and behavior if you're filming or taking pictures of people. And again, I think if anyone who's taken the participant observation session, Katie probably talks a bit about the role of the image. And if I show you an image, is it the end of the story? Do I have is this proof of what happened? Or do we need to think about the technology behind the production of the image, the angle, who took it, where it was presented, the context, all of that sort of stuff? We need to critically examine where what that image is and whether it is a sort of valid truth. We usually present a picture. Here's what happened, right? But now we have to sort of engage with that in a more critical way and say, okay, that's what happened when someone took that picture in that particular way, in that particular day, in that lighting, and so on. So we need to be aware of those issues. Right, so with that, okay, we're half an hour in. We've got about 45 minutes or so. We are going to move them 2 spaces. So please pass them this away. You can put your name on it again. Right, this is where it gets tricky. These people have been lucky because they're kind of clustered. Put your name on it, get drawing. Right? Right, so keep drawing, keep listening. So I'm going to talk about now, so that's the theory, the background. So I'm done with the sort of the background. Does anyone have any questions so far? Think this is making sense? Did I speak too fast? Did I skip over anything? Just sort of, making sense? Seems logical?
I can't concentrate on
I have no idea what
Good.
you said. I'm trying to work out what other I'm
Perfect.
supposed to draw
That's
the third
absolutely
time
fine.
or-
That's almost, yes.
I'm just curious of how you document it in your dissertation.
How you document this.
Yeah, how you would document not visualization, but visuals.
Right. Well, we will talk about that, about presenting it. But you have to. There's a process. And a product. So you would talk about both of those things. You can talk about the process. Like if I was saying this was a research project, I would describe. I had them do this. They draw. They passed along. I could describe that, and I could include some of the images as examples of what happened. And I could so it's the same thing. Yeah. So it's the same thing. You include it. The thing is. We talked about this in the last session about these outputs, and in some cases, if you're in a policy environment, some of these outputs people aren't really ready. They don't really want this. They want what's the evidence, what's the report, and something like this. And there will be different areas where you can present this information that often will have a bigger impact than maybe a written piece. Written piece is maybe what you have to produce to get your dissertation done, but maybe you'll find that the video or the image became more important in the long run or impacted a wider audience. So there's Sarah Pink writes about visual ethnography, and she has used pictures and photography in her research, and she researched women bullfighters. And this was obviously an unusual topic, and she has an image on the cover of her book of a bullfighter from behind, and she's got a hat and a braid, and the braid is like the symbol of the sort of disrupting the gender norms about bullfighting. And that image became important. She analyzed it as part of her work. She produced it, but then it became important for the bullfighting associations. So it transcended her research and became a very, very powerful image in that environment. So it went beyond her research itself. So you'll find that this kind of visual stuff may have impacts beyond just what you've done in a pure academic setting. Okay. So it accomplished all of those things. So we're going to talk about 3 different methods. These are ways of gathering data. So you will hopefully at the end of this understand 3 different perspectives and ways in which you can use visual methods as your field work, so to speak. All right. So the 3 are finding visual, so collecting from existing sources, existing images that already exist out there in the world, and collecting them and looking at them and analyzing them. Researcher-generated material, so you as a researcher going out and producing a visual piece. And then finally, working with participants. And there were a couple of people who mentioned they're interested in different communities and places. And so this would be ways, the third one would be ways in which you're getting people to produce stuff. So you're my participants here, you're producing something for me. And that you would fit that sort of third category so far. So those are what we're going to talk about. So the first one's quite simple and easy in theory, and how you actually adequately analyze these can be more complicated and tricky. So found visual material. So I showed the central area action plan for Bristol. So here we go. Analyze this, right? What are we saying about the city of Bristol from the cover of their action plan? So we've got images and maps, all sorts of right? So there's a huge amount of image data that's green infrastructure. What does the city present as its green infrastructure? What kind of images are presented? Certainly not the rubbish flowing down, after a Friday night in the harbor side, right? So they've got different sets of images that are expressing different ideas. So we can collect that. Archives, newspapers, books. If you're interested in a phenomena of any kind, there's a visual representation of it that is out there and is often ignored. People will study, what's the Bristol say about its central area plan, but they will fail to critically examine the imagery that goes along with it. So there's a huge amount of imagery involved in here. So is anyone planning to use any of those sources in part of their research? Who said yes? All right. So give me an example. Internet? Okay, what kind, right? What aspect of the internet will you be interrogating?
Specifically?
Yeah, yeah.
My UE library page.
Sorry? UE library page, right? Okay. So that would be your data. You'll be studying the UE library.
Well, you might get sometimes you can get pictures from the articles and stuff like that. But even just generally on the internet,
Yes.
Google Images is a big,
Google Images.
good place.
It could be quite an interesting project to sort of like Google urban regeneration and just let's see, well, what are the first 50 images that come up?
But all reports are like in their local council report, like with the Bristol one.
Yeah.
They always have, or they normally have a visual representation of something that
Okay.
would be of interest to you.
Good. Anyone else have anything sort of different from planning? I've been talking about planning. What about any of the IM people? Would you use any of these sources? Obviously you would, but like, is there anything, can you?
Images.
Well, no, in terms of anything, not image necessarily. Would you use any of these sources? Archives, newspapers?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, my interest is in kind of the gap between what kind of professional and paraprofessionals view as skills that are needed, basically. So possibly looking at like official reports, things like the Libraries of the Future or something like that. Some of the government-based kind of planning for how they view libraries, and then maybe using kind of user-generated things of how they view libraries and their mission.
Okay.
So the differences between the two. Maybe.
Right. And what kind of image information might be in those reports?
Kind of like, I guess, in terms of space, how people view what a library should look like, maybe,
Yeah.
and also kind of how people maybe view what librarians
Yeah.
like, libraries like
Yeah.
that sort of stuff. Maybe. I don't
Right, so our purpose here with this is to take the existing stuff that you might be looking at and try to say, well, in addition to the words that are written here, there are images, and I can spend some time actually critically engaged with those, the images and the visual data, the presentation of this stuff. And I'll talk about some examples, I think, now. So this is a student of mine who finished her master's and did it on the construction of heritage in modern architecture. So this was, she was interested in the listing process of how modern buildings become listed as historic. So when you list a building in this process, it becomes recognized as sort of historically important, and what you can do with it starts to become somewhat constrained. So it's an important process for protecting heritage, but also the building going forward is constrained, sort of, tearing it down becomes more difficult. What you can use it for can become can become tricky. So part of what her work was looking at plans and archives of what people said when they built the building. So what the planning was. So there's a vision plan from the city of Plymouth in the 1960s, I think, when this thing was built. And actually, this building on the right is a representation of the building. I think this was actually from the listing process. So So this was a contemporary document. So from the last 5 years, that was showing this as the building. So obviously, they're saying, look at this building the way it was when it was built. It's in its glory. Now, unfortunately, I should have done this with the building in the newspaper that didn't want the building listed, that was worried about that its regeneration capacity would be eliminated once it was listed as a heritage site, heritage building. and they would show it from these horrible angles, you know, with like graffiti and bits and sort of rubbish lying around. So they're obviously saying something else about the value of that building. They wouldn't show this image in that. So she looked at the way in which people were constructing their arguments about heritage, about what was important about heritage through the images and the way that the buildings were represented. She looked at archives, she looked at planning documents, she looked at websites and blogs and so on. So there was a huge amount of information about listing about this building that she was able to analyze and look at and study and use as part of her research. Right. So that is essentially found data. So I'm not going to spend much more time on that. My main argument right there is that there is a huge amount of information that's out there that you're already accessing that you that has image sources in it that you can join in with your analysis. You might be able to look at the listing process of a building almost exclusively through the images that are created as part of it. How many times have we moved? Are we okay?
Twice. Maybe.
Twice? All right, we could keep going for a few minutes there. Right. So now I'm going to move on to visual material that you as researchers might create. So now so the first one is you found some stuff and now you want to analyze it. And we'll talk a little bit at the end about analysis of all of this stuff. But so you've collected some data. You've got some images from archives, fine, whatever. Now we're going to talk about stuff that you might create. You are the researcher. You want to create some visual data. So it's sort of in the field work. You create this. And let's talk about a couple of methods in here. So the first, most obvious one is photo documentation. So this is essentially taking pictures. So you can get a fancy camera that's basically irrelevant now and take pictures of places. You can use iPhones and mobile phones, what have you. So documenting the situation. So you can use this simply. Say I'm interested in a place. I can take pictures of that. I can use that as to form an analysis of what's happening. I can take pictures over time. I can do a timeline sort of experiment. I can show pictures of people doing something. I can take pictures of you now. Look, this is what people look like when they're drawing and they're very confused. I can take a picture of a place and then bring it to somebody and have them talk about it. And I can say, "What do you think of this image I took of Plymouth Civic Center? You know, let's talk about that." All right. So we have lots of ways of taking photos. Obviously, if you're doing any kind of presentation, if you're doing any kind of dissemination, having some imagery about what's happened is incredibly useful, simply for the purposes of a nice presentation, but also in terms of remembering sort of things that happened in those spaces. Having this photo documentation is helpful. And I'll talk a bit more about analysis again at the end, about what you might want to do with that image. But let's just say for now, taking photos as a way of gathering data. The book by Marcus Banks, Visual Methods in Social Research, which is available as an electronic book, is quite good, particularly in terms of the sort of documentation methods. So you might, if you're interested, you might want to have a look at that. I'll talk here about a project that I produced or did or researched in the Bear Pit in Bristol and used photo documentation as sort of the key method. Is everyone so the Bear Pit is a roundabout in Bristol. It's right in the center. It's pretty much it's basically considered pretty dangerous and unliked space for a long time. It's now improved quite a bit. It's considered to be on its way up. There's lots of little shops and people in there hanging out. It's the center of a roundabout, so it's not really the greatest space naturally in the world. There's actually supposed to be a road going right through it, so it wasn't ever really supposed to be what it is, but it is an accidental space, and people do love it, and people hang out there. There's still some issues with homelessness and street drinking, but there it is. There's your city right there. So I was studying that space for a while and used visual methods for quite a while as part of my research to supplement sort of interviews that I did. So one of the methods I used was time-lapse photography. So I have a time-lapse camera. I put this in a tree and filmed the space for several days in different periods, different times of days. But the main point was about 18 hours from morning to night. I got the whole sort of day, people walking through the movements, the change of the space. I wasn't really sure exactly why I was doing that when I did it, but I kind of knew I wanted to see the space go from its transformation from morning to night, and see how people move out. The stalls come out, people go through the movements and stuff in that space. In addition, I brought some cameras, some video cameras down that UE has, and just filmed people using the space and talked to them. So rather than just sort of interviewing with a microphone or just chatting, I had some cameras. And I have, in both of these things, I have some visual. I think I have some visual stuff. So this is a sort of quick little summary of some of what's happening in the bear pit that I produced for the internet for the bear pit group.
I've been walking through the bear pit since I was a child, and it's always been a bit of an eyesore. I mean, even in the 80s, and I really like the fact now that Stokes Croft has moved down and taken over the bear pit and made it into a more of an interesting cultural place where you might want to actually stop rather than just trying to run through it as fast as possible. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so cold.
Hello.
Use it.
How are you?
What are you doing in the bear pit?
Well, at the bear pit we've heard there were some blocks with letters and numbers on, so we've come along to explore them. And actually I'm not exploring them, but Ella and Luca.
And what do you think?
Well, what was here before? Nothing. So it adds a bit of something, doesn't it? And people are stopping and playing with them.
Right, before I do that one. So the first one was a very short snap of what I thought was important. I was able to sort of summarize very quickly some stuff that was happening in the bear pit, to document some of the stuff that I was doing. Took some videos. So I have loads of interview quotes and comments and things and able to use in research. But then I've got this stuff, which is hopefully used in part to express a little bit else of the importance of my research. Now, that and this little piece, which is based on the time-lapse, are both things that have been sort of, produced for the bear pit, for the people who operate the bear pit, so that the volunteers and people who go there. So to say that, look, I'm researching in this space, I'm here a lot, I'm interviewing you and talking to you, but also I'm trying to promote and be engaged in this space in a bit more. So some of these are ways of just sort of drawing attention to this space and the issues there in a way that maybe a journal article or a dissertation may not help. So this is just, I'll just play this kind of very quickly. This is the so you can see the day sort of going. I'll just turn this down for a second. So in the back are actually quotes from interviews and discussions that I had with people in the bear pit over time. And in this particular one, I worked with a media artist who helped make the collage. So he helped put this together and did some funny business with the people to make them sort of more ghost-like. And he helped put the audio on top in his own way. He had his own bit of interpretation. And I guess one thing that happened here in this was that his collection of the audio and the visual material to create his own output helped me think about the space in a different way. So I was able, by working with someone with a different perspective, I was able to come up with a slightly different take on the bear pit and have a completely different kind of output that I never would have produced on my own. And again, so the bear pit community groups and the People's Republic of Socracoff have linked to this and have that on their websites and stuff. So it's been a way to sort of be more, I think, more ethically engaged in this space to say, to talk about what's happening and the change there. So it's become part of the sort of just public world of bits. So I've written about this. I've got journal articles and papers and things about this, but then I've also got visual summaries as well that are trying to hit different sorts of audiences. You can see it goes on for about 8 minutes like this, and then it's only effective, I think, with headphones probably, as then it gets nighttime, and then things happen. There's no So anyhow, so those are a bit just simply using documentation as a way to to generate material and to do some thinking about a space. Little cameras, just simple iPhones or mobile phones, or more. But the thing is, once you start getting into some of these other methods, you do like to collect a lot of kit. That's the sort of the glory of stuff. Oh, I need a special camera for that. But anyhow, that can be fun. So we've talked about found images. We've talked a bit about researcher-generated images, which is mostly around sort of documenting, taking pictures, right? There could be there could be other ways in all of these. And now we're going to talk about using participants as a way to generate material. So I'm going to talk, this is, I think, maybe the most robust area of visual methods. So I want to talk about 4 of these briefly, and give you some examples from my research and some student research as well. Photo elicitation, photo voice, drawing and sketching, and experiential mapping. So we'll talk briefly about each of those. Right, so let's do one last pass along. And then I have a few from the previous group, by the way, and we can compare whether these, yeah, someone's disappeared.
I think he's coming back later.
Oh, right, okay. It's very interesting to look at. Some of them are sort of, well done. You can put your name on it. I think, so 1, 2, 3, 4. This will be the last one. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So you've done about half, each of you, right? You've missed, well, no, you've probably done all but maybe 1 or 2, probably. Been involved in many of them. Well, that'd be interesting to see. Okay, so let's do the final bit here in terms of methods, data collection, is working with participants. Okay? So the first one, no cheating. So the final bit we're going to talk about working with participants. Okay? So the first one we'll talk about is this thing we often refer to as photo elicitation. Okay? So this is essentially, in layman's terms, asking people to take pictures for you. Okay? So participant constructed images. So in a way, this is partially photo elicitation, I suppose, drawing elicitation. But essentially, the method is asking people to take images of what they think is important to them, or giving them some direction to say, you're interested in urban regeneration. Take a picture of your most favorite regenerated site or your best development or something like this, and then bring it to us. And where this really comes into its own is talking about those images. So photo elicitation is about asking people to take an image, and then you can collect it, and that is a record of what that person found to be important. But it really does have incredible value when you can talk about that image. Then, why did you choose this image? Tell me more about it. What does it remind you of? What does it speak to you? So you can use the image as a prompt. This particular method also works quite well simply with found images. So if I take this image from the cover of our favorite Civi, action plan here, I can say, what does this say to you? What does this say to you?
It says nice sunny commercial water frontage.
Yeah, very good. Happy people. Looks beautiful. Looks right. So it's saying a lot. So we can use that as a way. All right. Yeah. Okay. Why do you say that? So we can start to dig a bit deeper about. Have you ever been to this space? Do you have any memories of this space? We can start to unpick your experience rather than just saying, "Can you tell me about the harbor side?" By using an image that we want people to talk about, we can generate a bit more of a discussion about that. So use found images, but it's really effective if you can ask someone to take an image for you. Why did you choose this image? What was, when people are participants in the practice of selecting the image, it becomes quite useful. Even asking people, can you find an image from the newspaper or something that's important to you in some way? So having people take images or produce images and using them to talk about, and then using this image in in part of your qualitative sort of interview process can be very, very effective. Rather than simply saying, tell me about Bristol Harborside, all right, go take a picture of the best and worst bit of Bristol Harborside, and let's unpick why you chose those images, and what is it that stands out, and so on. So it can be a very effective method. So this is a project that I was a researcher on called Foodscapes, and these were participated generated images. Okay, so these were people. These are meals produced by people who get their food from a food bank. So they are living in a situation of precarity, and we gave them, in this case, we gave them disposable cameras, and they had them for 2 weeks, and we asked them to take images of their meals for 2 weeks, and so we got hundreds of images of these, so three per day per person. We had about 15 people do it, of taking their images, and we took those images and then talked to them a bit about what did you find important about this one, this one. The one on the right was possibly one of the more interesting ones, because this was a Jamaican family who was able to use the food bank food and was able to sort of top up in a creative way with some meat and things and foods that they weren't part of the offer from the food bank. Whereas the others, you can see, are in a more dire situation, either not able to think about food in that way, or just simply not having the financial ability or possibility of doing that. So they're just dealing essentially with the pure basics. We took these images, talked to participants about them to get a bit more information about why they took those images, what was important about the food, to get a little bit more information about how they were eating and so on. And we also presented it in a museum, in a pop-up museum space. So there was a sort of empty shop in Bristol, and we put these images on the wall and presented them as part of an exhibition on food and precarity and so on. So we were using those images to give a sort of, to promote this, awareness really around food banks and food poverty in Bristol. So using it, right, so this to me was a more effective way than just what do you eat every day. Having the image summary of it, representation of it was effective. Treating these images, this image here with the meatballs, I guess those are, as, putting them in a museum space, surrounded by all the accoutrements of a museum, was an interesting, for me, juxtaposition of what of these sort of dire situations, and then this as being as an important piece of sort of artwork. Oops. So I've talked about photo elicitation. So that was asking people to take pictures. Photo voice takes that, but it takes it one step further. There's a great book that you can look at. There's an ebook on urban youth and photo voice. And photo voice, what this does is it takes it a step further. It says, we're not going to sort of use your images, but we're going to empower you a bit more to tell your story through images and through media. So often this is referred to as digital storytelling. So you'll see people. You see this used as what we want you to do is, so in the case of the food charities, we might have asked those people to produce, not only to take the images, but to produce stories around them, to learn how to do some of the montage or to really embellish that story in their own way, to use visual material to tell their story, and without giving them as much direction. It's really, photo voice is really about letting people speak their problems in using a visual methods. It seemed to be something more empowering than simply taking images and then presenting them to the public, but letting people produce the final, be more involved in the final output of the representation. So photo elicitation, photo voice often sort of get mixed up, but essentially the idea here is trying to use visual methods as a way of empowering people to say something. So right, by giving someone a camera and helping them create a digital representation of what's happening around them, you give them a way to say something, to put their voice out there in a new way. So drawing and sketching. So we're familiar with that by now. So we'll say something more specifically about the drawings that we've done here in a moment. But more generally, I think what I want you to think about is the idea of the drawing as a process and also as a product. So these will be products, right? They're final produced items, right? But there was also a process that's been gone on here. So in this idea of drawing, we were able to experience something collaboratively, something working together, right? Or just even if we were doing this on our own, there's a mindset we have to be in when we're actually drawing something. There's a process involved in doing drawing work. And then we also have these as products. There will be something, these can be looked at and thought of as outputs that we can then critically examine. We can try and unpack a bit more about what drawings might mean to people. So getting people to draw stuff can be useful. I'll give you a couple of examples. So this is in the health sort of domain. This is an example of a researcher who used drawing as a way to have people talk about their illnesses. So in this case, there was a young person who had a heart defect of some kind when they were a bit younger, and she drew the heart on the left to represent that moment of when she was particularly ill and she needed medical attention and so on. So the arrow, going through the heart, and the one on the right shows her today. So over time, this is how I feel now. My heart is slightly different shape, but the scar is still there. She still is who she was, who she's gone through that, but she's able to represent a sort of healing process. So these two images in this particular research is a record of her sort of journey through that illness. So it's a way of expressing visually something important about how that person feels, how they go through, how they change, how they deal with a certain situation. Obviously, that's dealing with a medical condition, but you could have someone draw how they felt when they moved to a new city, and then how they felt when they left, or something like this. So you can see different ways to use drawing to express those ideas. This one is this is an undergraduate student who did a great project with mapping and drawing. Okay, so in this case, Emma had her participants, so this is participant drawn, so her participants were Erasmus students who were new to Bristol, and she asked them to draw their journey to UWE from their new home here in Bristol. And the first one on the left is when they sort of arrived, the middle one is a few months in, the last one is when they were leaving, all right? And these are snapshots of a larger image. It's a piece of paper about this large that people would draw their whole journey on, but this is just one little bit. This is the home across time. You can see very clearly this is saying quite a bit about home to us right here. We can sort of make some assumptions just looking at these images. But where this really came into its own was when Emma talked to this person and got some more information about, okay, I see you've drawn home quite differently in the three images. Can you tell me about what's going on in each one of these? And obviously the first one is home. Here, when she drew it, she was unfamiliar with the place. It has a very sort of stale, non-place sort of look about it. Just a terraced house. Here's my home. I guess it's that, second one from the right, maybe. I don't know. And the arrows, I think, are usually directions of going. Oh, actually, there's probably an arrow showing where she's leaving. The second one, she only found out from that, well, what's going on there? She found out that there was some trouble with a neighbor. One of the next door neighbors was incredibly loud or problematic, and this was her way of representing that in the graphic. And the graphic is expressing, that the journey. Home is a scarier place at that moment, not very pleasant. There's obviously the use of color red, and the final one, the house is sort of on its own there. There's no more houses around it. It's glorious. She's leaving it. She's starting to feel sad about leaving this place. And the analysis here is starting to look at how people form attachments over time to place, and how through journeys, through movements, through place, we form attachments, and what are the signals, what are the things we sort of pick up on. And as this goes through, her map goes through different sorts of places of the city, there'll be different representations that pop up and change over time. So she's documenting through that. So so she had a bunch of participants who drew maps over time. So it's a combination of some of the materials and some of the approaches that we've been talking about. together. Right. So that's a summary of some of the methods that at least I've used, my students have used, or I think are quite useful or doable in a dissertation. Some may be a bit trickier in terms of equipment, but all of these I think are useful. To say something about analysis, what you want to do, if you're going to take visual methods seriously, is be purposeful in the way you analyze the data. Gillian Rose has a great book on visual methods, which is in the library, and she highlights 3 sort of sites of analysis that are important when looking at visual material. And we can think about this, if you think about your own projects or any piece of visual evidence you might have or collected, you might think about, you would analyze them possibly from 1 or all 3 of these directions. So the first is the sort of the site of production, like when was the image created, who created it, why was it created, what were the conditions. So when we think about the heritage image I showed you of Plymouth Civic Center, that image was created for a very purposeful reason about celebrating the sort of modern lifestyle of the new Civic Center. Here comes Plymouth, rebuilding after World War II and everything, way forward and stuff. So that's that. The image itself, what does the image say? What actually can we say about the image? Can we look at the image and what are the elements of the image that I can analyze? And Gillian Rose has some guidance about how to look at an image and how to sort of understand what the image is saying, and how to interpret the messages. But really, I mean, the Civic Center one, quite easy, saying something quite important about that. This is Plymouth's future. This is a way forward, modern, clean, rational. All this sort of stuff comes out through that image. And the third one is the site of audiencing, sort of who receives these messages. So again, thinking about the Civic Center, there was the listing process, the newspapers. There's different areas where these images are being sent, and what are the intended effects of those images. So how was it received? Who receives it? And what were the sort of purposes of that message? Very sort of quick overview on the way of analysis, but if you start to think about those different sites, how was it produced? What does it say? How was it received? You start to get somewhere about starting to analyze it. In other respects, things like what you would do with text, thematic analysis. You can take 20 images. Say asked you for your favorite. Say we said all of you for your favorite image of Bristol. Okay, and I had 15 images of Bristol. I could take those images and I could analyze them. Right? That's data, right? I can start to look. Well, they each. Some people showed me Harborside, right? I can use that as data. I can start to look at those images. It's much more effective if I then can go speak to you and say, why did you send me this, and get some more. We can talk about that further. But that's a bit a way of doing analysis of it. I can look at the. I can take the. Although before I say that, I can look at the image itself and do essentially what most 10 people showed me the cathedral. 5 people showed me the Harborside. 1 person showed me their house. Right? I can start to look at the content, right, in a more sort of just almost quantitative way about what are these images showing me. So you can almost apply a quantitative approach if you get enough visual evidence to start to think about the way in which what these images are saying. So you can use these. The analysis can sort of fit a lot of the kinds of questions that you're seeking to answer in that sense. So Gillian Rose has a great bit on how to start thinking about doing analysis. With any of the methods books, I would say you have to read purposefully. You can't just read from start to finish. You can maybe read the introduction and then find the chapter that's particularly useful for you. But if you read them like as a novel, it doesn't really work because there'll be many sections of methods books that are irrelevant to what you're doing. So I'm handing out a sheet of references that I created. There's a bazillion more. And then no one's sitting there, right? So you can have a look at that. I've also set these out. Maybe just all right. So get these out. So these are the slides from today. But like I said, Steve has filmed it. It'll all be on the website. And I guess what I want to do now, before we talk about your individual projects, let's have a look at these drawings. Right. The first thing I can ask is to each of you, before, as we're looking at them, which one is yours? Yours is this one. Why is that?
Because I'm working back somewhere at this point.
So this is the one you started with. Right, so this one is yours, not that one.
Yeah, what makes yours?
I can have. I reckon I've got more degree of ownership on some than others. I think that's about as close as I can.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have an idea of which ones they might be?
Probably the first and third ones, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. We didn't spend. I'm not sure if we spent equal time. I wasn't keeping track of the time so much, but I think this is an interesting exercise for a few reasons, and I'll explain sort of why I think this works. Okay. First, the key thing is here. It was drawing as process. So I put you in a different space while we were here listening to this than just listening to me speak. You were doing something. We could have done, I guess, a bit of drawing and then me speaking and a bit of like taking pictures and stuff. But I quite like disrupting the sort of general thing. I like having something in the middle of the room, having us in a circle. So having you draw and do something while I'm talking puts you in your body in a different rhythm. So I think having drawing as process is an important part of getting you into a different frame of listening and sort of being in this space. Whether it works or not, I'm not particularly sure. The foodscapes thing, one aspect we did of that with the food project, we had people baking bread in that space as well as looking at the images. And so people were kneading dough for about 30 minutes or whatever and cooking and stuff, and it created a bodily rhythm for the conversations we were having with people. So drawing, in a similar way, will create a bodily rhythm for a conversation you might have with someone. You may not ask them to share it around like this, but you say, oh, could you draw me your home? And as they draw it, you might have a conversation with them, and they're in a space. That means the interview, the discussion is going to take a certain amount of time. They're going to be in a certain space. It's going to be a certain rhythm. So it's going to set them in a certain sort of bodily, emotional state of that process, and gets them to think slightly differently. The second one is obviously collaboration, right? So we had to take these and rework them, or so. I think this is interesting. This is an interesting example of collaboration. So in this one, there's a lot of overlapping. Okay, so it seems like people kept maybe less collaboration possibly going on in this one, right? So people are trying to dominate, trying to figure out, no, this is my view. And there's a few others, especially the ones with people I find particularly interesting, right? So here, there's people, right? So so anytime right? So they certainly weren't in this position the whole time, right? But then they were at one point. And people didn't scratch them out or what have you, or maybe they added to them. So can someone say, did anyone, when you were working on this, did you try to take on another perspective than the one you were at, or you were always using your own perspective?
Mixture.
Sorry?
It's a mixture, I use both.
Okay. So did...
I always added things that I saw from my perspective to their additional ones. So I didn't add any new drawings, I just either added shading to it or just like added bits on that I knew were on this side they couldn't see from their side.
Okay. Interesting. Right.
I agree. I tried to just develop the from their perspective rather than try and put a second and third and fourth. I'll be honest, I didn't add lots of that on my
Yes, this is the one that people just, it seems like had struggled with to work together on. This is also interesting. This is interesting. This one stayed up in the corner, right? And there was one, I think, that was portrait, right? So it's this one here. They're all landscape style, I would say this. Well, wait, is that portrait? Wait, one of them is, which one is it? Oh, this one, right? The problematic one, right? Maybe that says something. But anyhow, all of them, interestingly, maybe that's because I had the paper on the desk like this. But everyone drew it pretty much that way, except for this one that decided to put it this way. Who started this one?
I did.
Right. So why did you start this way?
I started to save the rest of the page because I didn't know what we are going
Yes.
to do.
Okay. Well.
That was my
Right.
idea.
Well done. Like this one in the corner obviously thought we were going to do something a lot more ambitious. Was someone starting a new drawing, or was it there's another square? Was that an aborted attempt to?
I didn't want to add to the
completely
design, so
collaborative.
You were just- yes.
I just looked and then I just started
Right.
and stuff on the wall.
Okay. Fantastic. So I think we can learn something a bit about collaboration, about how people work together by doing an exercise like this. Perspective, I think, is the most important element of this. So we have a very real element of perspective happening here. You have a different perspective than he does on this thing, right? So where's the front?
Wherever you stand.
Right. Where I'm standing.
What you mean? For you, it's what you're
Where-
looking at.
All right, well,
For me,
where's
it's
the
from
front?
From me, it's from the other side.
Right. So if we can think of this more metaphorically, if this is a research entity of some kind, a social phenomena, anything, where is the front of that thing? The perspective is incredibly important. About our ways in are always important about how we create a representation of a thing. So thinking about this in a very sort of metaphorical way, how we enter a problem, how we view it, is going to say a lot about how we represent it. So if we can shift the perspectives in some ways, we can start to create, I think, a more robust account. Now, is this wrong? Is this not that? Right? So it is that, right? It's that from multiple perspectives in a collaborative sort of way, right? So it's a different, it's a multi-perspective, collaborative representation of this stick in here. So there's nothing wrong about this. It's just a multiple. It's a different way of representing a social object, an object, and you can think about that, I think, in any research project. If when you walk in and you describe it as it is, you're describing it from one project, one perspective. So the idea here is to shift perspective. And I think it's also ownership. I'm really interested in ownership of these things and about which one is yours and where you start to get that attachment to these things. I thought often it's the first one or the last one, but rarely probably the middle one. I don't know. No one wants this one, clearly. Can anyone say which one? So you said this is yours. All right, so you can take this one. So does anyone else feel attachment to any of them? You can sort of hold them up or look around. Does anyone feel like there was one that was really yours?
Yeah, I kind of liked that one.
You spent a long time on that
Well,
one.
I took some risks with the
Ooh.
composition.
Really brought up the eyes.
I love this picture because I really loved it because it's like there is a viewing of the background of the tree and outside the room as well.
Can you hold it up so we can see it? Oh, right, so I got outside. It's got a lot of bored people as well. Yeah, that's quite interesting. That's one that didn't. I haven't seen that before. So you might be interested in some of the first session. I'll show you these because I just find it fascinating. This I thought was interesting. People decided in this one to stick to the original perspective. So they were imagining themselves in the other side of the room when they collaborated on it. Okay, so that's, I think, quite fascinating. A way of collaborating. Quite similar, this one, right? Which found, right? So people trying to rectify the different views of the thing. This is here's again portrait style problem. So this one decided to do the aardvark version, right? So they couldn't find, so this was one that people were putting their own perspective in and making it work. Again, multi-perspective view of a piece of stick from across the room. So I think hopefully some interesting lessons in terms of how we might use drawing, collaborative working, participation, visual methods. So I think with the last couple of minutes here, so we've got a few minutes, is to sort of think openly, and maybe I can help answer some questions about your research projects. I'm particularly interested in the ones that aren't so inclined or are in information management sort of areas, to see if you can think about, does any of this ring to you? Did any of it pop out? I could use that. This makes sense. This doesn't make. Is there anything? Does anyone want to volunteer anything that they've heard today that they think they might draw on?
I've had a bit of a thing about hoardings on new buildings and the lack of sort of information that's provided to the people that live around there. It's always just you know, either considerate constructors or like the branding
Hmm.
of this, but how the people who are in the site and understand, you know, they're building it and putting things in, what their ideas about what might go on the hoardings, like in the, you know, the Harris fencing out the front,
Yeah.
what that might be, and give them a chance to sort
Yeah.
of think about images
Yeah.
that represent what they're doing.
I think it's interesting. Even just studying the imagery that people put on the walls, right in front of these construction sites. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah. So
yeah.
maybe that, you know, because I'm interested in products, that, you know, I think that they're not, you know, the spread of sustainable products isn't going as fast because they're not advertised in that sort of way. Like if people were just walking past it every day,
Yeah.
they'd see. But you know, these people who are familiar and they're putting them in buildings, you know, day
Yeah.
to day, that, you know, you show them a whole bunch of products and they might go, oh, you know, that one, you know, that one, and they
Yeah.
might be able to come up with some kind of way of
Yeah.
representing them on the.
Yeah. So you might be able to engage people to do something creative in their.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
especially people who probably wouldn't be inclined to do
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Right. Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'm quite excited by it. I've attended today the focus groups, so the interviews for the questionnaires. But actually, getting people to draw their ideal library or what the hive represents, the building that I'm using as a case study, from both staff higher up as well, of what, when they've got their eyes closed, what their ideal is. And what they think about, and whether that impacts on how successful it's been and the vision that they tried to create.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's maybe
Yeah.
something I could
Okay.
We'll see.
So if someone was to draw their ideal building or ideal thing in anything, you know, they're going to have to do something different than tell you what it is.
Yeah.
I can tell you what my ideal building might have, but if I have to draw some aspect of it, it's going to be access different parts of their expression. So
It may be more services that
yeah.
I will try and get them to draw, but
Yeah.
it's something to run with maybe.
Yes. Cool. Anyone else have any reflections then?
Yes, because part of mine is around boundaries and basically what that might mean to people. One thing we're going to have to consider for that is what kind of values people see in that boundary. So what, say, a resident might see in a boundary, it might be shelter, like sort of it keeps them safe from more development than they want. But a developer might see it as like a barrier to the development they want. So you're going to have a lot of different perspectives on that line, and people are going to want to know where should it be, and then why do you think it should include that? Why shouldn't it include that? That's something I could explore a bit. I'm not sure if I could explore it fully because that's going off
Yeah.
on a bit away from where I was starting. But it's an interesting thing
Yeah.
to be able to think on.
You might be able to get people to draw just where do you think the barrier to your neighborhood is or this area. Where is the green space? You know, what is it? You know, have a.
If you could safeguard an area, what
Yeah.
area would you safeguard? No. Okay, why have you put that in where it isn't in at the moment? Oh, well, because it's. And then they say that whole story kind of flows from there.
Yeah, I mean another way with this also, if say people go into an open space and they walk through it, or they go, you know, you can ask them, you know, when you go, you know, can you draw your path through there, and what are the important sites? What bits of it do you actually like? And you go, oh yeah, I go through here. There's a great tree. You know, this is where the dogs are. You know, this sorts of things. So you get a different way of them possibly thinking about that space if you can ask them to draw it rather than just talk about it. So it might be. Anyone else? Any of the other non-converted? Is there anything pop up that it might be an opportunity to? And so you've got possibly more options in yours with image.
Particularly with image, like
Yeah.
I like the idea of empowering people.
Yeah.
Because with my research, it's kind of going on the assumption that there is a gap between those that manage libraries and their viewpoint on, say, digital literacy and what's required of those who work in libraries. The gap. So what I kind of want to do is be able to formulate a plan that would then show where these gaps are, or how people feel about certain technology, so that the ability to then allow, say, paraprofessionals to express, not just through kind of drawing or find an image or something of how you feel about this technology or that way you can identify kind of maybe there's a difference between how people feel about certain things.
Cool. Great. So there's ideas here, the opportunities. There's been an overview. There's many, many more approaches and methods that can be used in the visual sense, and mixing them. The ideal, I say this a lot, is the image and the discussion interview is a very effective way, you know, of having an object as another way of doing it. This is something we've been trying to do with the infrastructure water workers, is say, here's an object. Can you tell us a bit about this, about the way you use it? So getting them to have a discussion around a thing to start to solicit more kinds of conversations about practices and things like that. So there's an endless way in which you can use this. But yeah. So anyhow, so I think. If there's no other questions, I'm happy to be. You can email me if you have any other questions. You want some more references or anything like that. Probably have my email somewhere, and happy to help along. And give some more advice or listen to your ideas if that's helpful.